I never expected that choosing a simple life would turn me into the butt of jokes within my own family. They said I lacked ambition, had no direction. One even asked outright, "Do you need to borrow some money?" But what they didn't know was that while they were busy bragging, I had been quietly preparing for a turning point no one saw coming. That's why I chose to stay silent for years. Until that night, when I brought a real estate contract and placed it on the table, right in the middle of their laughter. I was born and raised in Oregon, in what my mother proudly called a traditionally successful family. We weren't new money. My grandparents had owned a chain of lumber mills since the 1960s, later transitioning into real estate and equity investments. Nearly all my uncles, aunts, and cousins followed the legacy. Some became fund managers, some real estate developers, others worked at prestigious law firms. I was the odd one out, the third of 4 siblings, and possibly the biggest outlier. After graduating with a sociology degree from the University of Washington, I chose to work for a nonprofit in Portland. The salary was enough to live on, but never enough for my family to consider stable. At every family gathering I was either forgotten, or worse, used as the example of what not to do with your life. In their eyes, I was the one who ate vegan, biked to work, rented an apartment, and was still unmarried past 30. All of those, to them, were clear signs of failure. My mother still loved me, but would often whisper, "Have you thought about switching to finance? Your cousin just bought a penthouse working at that firm." I got used to being judged. In fact, I accepted it. I knew I lived differently. I didn't dress to impress, didn't flaunt watches, didn't talk about ROI at the dinner table. But what they didn't understand was that living simply didn't mean I lacked financial sense. I'd been quietly learning, investing in small ways, saving bit by bit, and never spending to impress. My cousin Preston once said to my face, "If you're still living on Alder Street, you might want to reconsider. That whole area's about to be bought up and redeveloped. No smart person would still live there." I just smiled, because I knew that a few weeks earlier, I'd already placed a down payment on the biggest building in that very neighborhood, through a company registered under a different name. And of course, none of them had a clue. To them I always lacked scale. No home of my own, nothing worth showing off. What they didn't know was that the most valuable thing I owned was patience. And a long-term plan I'd kept to myself for nearly 7 years. Our family gatherings happened quarterly, usually hosted at the wealthiest uncle or aunt's home. This time, it was at Uncle Roger's estate, the one who manages a fund worth hundreds of millions. Every time I stepped into homes like that, I prepared myself. Good food, expensive wine, and questions disguised as polite concern. I knew this time wouldn't be any different. But I also knew it would be the last time they saw me as poor. Uncle Roger's mansion was about a 40-minute drive from downtown Portland, nestled in an upscale neighborhood locals jokingly called the waiting room before investment heaven. The house spanned nearly 10,000 square feet, with a saltwater pool, floor-to-ceiling glass walls, and a wine cellar that could make a Michelin restaurant jealous. I arrived 10 minutes early as usual. Not to impress, just because I liked watching the quiet before the show. Uncle Roger's personal assistant led me through the grand foyer. The scent of luxury perfume mingled with soft jazz playing from hidden speakers, making the space feel both elegant and distant. Soon everyone else arrived. Preston, as always, in a navy suit with 2 shirt buttons undone and sunglasses on, despite it being dark. My cousin Madison, a former lawyer who'd left her firm to run her late father's venture capital fund. Then Tyler, who called himself a real estate restructuring specialist. Really just someone who flipped old homes for outrageous prices. I sat near the window, silent as usual. And just as I expected, the evening quickly turned into a financial flex-off. Preston raised his glass of red wine, grinning from ear to ear. "It's been a good season. The properties I picked up in Austin are up 12%. You all should think about pulling out of the coastal markets. Too saturated." Madison chimed in, not to be outdone. "Just closed our Series B round. Looking to expand into Seattle. By the way, I'm meeting with Tokyo partners next week." I just gave a soft smile. These kinds of conversations were so familiar. I could guess the script before anyone spoke. The only thing that changed each quarter was the scale of the bragging. Later, when the food arrived, Tyler suddenly turned to me. His voice wasn't loud, but it was loud enough for the whole table to hear. "What about you, Nora? Still working at that non-profit?" I looked up and nodded slowly. "Still there. Wow, sticking with it, huh? Ever thought about changing lanes? You know, this market's booming. Eyes everywhere, real estate's exploding. You should take advantage while it's still open." I took a sip of water. "Thanks for the advice. I'm good with what I'm doing." Madison jumped in, half joking, half serious. "Tyler just means, we all want to see you more stable. I mean, at our age, no one should still be renting." Laughter echoed around the table. Preston nodded in agreement. "I actually heard Nora's living in the Alder Street area. Don't take this the wrong way, but I think that neighborhood's about to be cleared out for a new commercial zone. You might want to consider moving soon." I set my water glass down on the table. "Interesting. I happen to think that area will hold its original value." Preston laughed. "Trust me, I've been trying to buy one of the corner buildings there for months. The previous owner was a nightmare. But no worries, I've got my ways." I looked him straight in the eye. "Do you happen to know who actually bought that building?" "Some company. West Pine Holdings, I think." I nodded, then slowly pulled a neat folder from my bag. I placed it gently on the table, right in front of Preston. "What's this?" he asked, frowning. I replied, my voice calm. "Transfer of ownership agreement. The building on the corner of Alder and 7th Street. Finalized last week." The air around us suddenly froze. Preston picked up the folder and flipped through a few pages. Madison leaned in to read along. Tyler looked at me like he was seeing a stranger. I folded my hands in front of me. "I run West Pine Holdings." Silence. Then a low murmur rippled across the table. Uncle Roger rested his chin on his hand, his eyes studying me, something between curiosity and recognition. "Why did you buy it?" he asked. "Not to tear it down. To redevelop it into affordable housing for working families. With your own money. And a portion from the fund I've been building over the last 5 years." No one said another word. The clinking of cutlery quietly faded away. Preston placed the folder back on the table. His first moment of speechlessness all evening. I smiled, looking at each of them in turn. I don't need anyone's approval. But it's time everyone understood. Not everyone who lives simply is poor. And not everyone who stays quiet has nothing to show for it. After a heavy pause, Madison was the first to speak, her voice no longer mocking. "Nora, how long have you been running West Pine Holdings?" I answered slowly. "Since day one. I started the company with money I saved over 7 years. On your own?" "At first, yes. Then I brought in a few partners, mostly non-profit housing funds. We buy buildings on the brink of abandonment and turn them into sustainable housing for middle-income families." My cousin blinked rapidly. Preston still stared at the folder like it might burst into flames. I knew West Pine Holdings might not be a household name in the commercial real estate world, but for anyone tracking sustainable urban development in Portland, it was a quietly growing force. "And that building, how much were you planning to invest in it?" I turned to Preston. He frowned. "Around $8 million. I nodded, then said casually, "I paid 6.5. The previous owner prioritized keeping the original structure and not raising rents." Tyler let out a laugh, trying to stifle it. "Jesus. Preston, you just got outplayed by Nora." I said nothing more. I didn't need to. At this point, any further explanation was unnecessary. I looked around the table. They used to see me as slow, predictable, not cut out for business. But while they chased hot markets like Miami and Austin, I'd quietly built a network of legacy owners, preservation architects, and impact investors. I wasn't buying to demolish. I was buying to preserve, and that's what gave me the edge. Dinner continued, but no one spoke much. Phrases like funding rounds and venture capital quietly slipped out of the conversation, as if they no longer belonged. For the first time in years, I wasn't overlooked or pitied. They looked at me differently, with a mix of confusion, envy, and mostly surprise. When dessert was served, Uncle Roger finally spoke, his voice low and deliberate. "How long do you plan to hold on to that building?" "Long term. No plan to flip it quickly." "No, I'm not in a rush. I want to build something solid, for people who don't get chances like I did." He nodded, his expression serious for the first time. That's rare in this industry. To me, it might have been the most genuine compliment I'd ever received from him. I pulled a white business card from my pocket and placed it on the table, as lightly as an invitation. "If anyone here actually wants to invest in something that lasts, I'd be happy to talk." Tyler picked up the card. Madison stared at me, clearly reevaluating everything she thought she knew about me. Preston still hadn't processed the fact that the person he'd always dismissed had just outplayed him. I don't blame them. They were raised to believe that success had to be loud, with penthouses, sports cars, gold-plated watches, and photos of contract signings next to top-shelf whiskey. They didn't understand that silence could also carry powerful transformations. I simply did what I believed was right, and I was patient enough to wait for the moment to prove it. Dinner ended. I stood up early as usual. But this time, no one asked if I needed a ride home. Tyler said, "Nora, maybe you could show me some of your projects sometime?" I smiled. "Any time you'd like." Leaving the estate, I walked through the perfectly manicured garden as a cool breeze swept by. A self-driving electric car was already waiting at the entrance. I got into the back seat and typed in my destination. Not a rental apartment, but my new combined office and home, located on the top floor of the very building at Alder and 7th Street. I didn't need their admiration, but now they knew who I was, and I knew I had chosen the right path. The next morning, as I sat in my top-floor office, bathed in light with a panoramic view of downtown Portland, my phone started ringing. News of the Alder Street building acquisition had just been published on a local real estate site. Though I had tried to keep it quiet, the investor world has its own network, and the name West Pine Holdings couldn't stay hidden forever. The first message was from Madison. "Are you free this week? I have a few ideas for collaboration, if you're open to sharing." I stared at the screen, unsure if it was genuine curiosity or just polite follow-up after being blindsided. The next was a call from Tyler. I didn't pick up, but he left a voicemail. "I'm really impressed with your project. Would love to meet and talk more about your financial model. We're looking for more stable investment channels." I laughed. A week ago, Tyler told me I should reconsider my path. Now he wants to discuss models. The shift didn't make me smug, but it did make me realize something. When a woman stays quiet, people assume she's weak. But once she has proof, that silence becomes her weapon. That evening, I went to have dinner at my mom's house. The small, classic home in Alameda hadn't changed much over the years, aside from a few new potted plants she'd added. When I walked in, she was in the kitchen chopping vegetables. She looked up at me, eyes filled with pride and a quiet emotion she couldn't quite hide. "You surprised me," she said, handing me a bowl of hot soup. I smiled. "You're not upset that I kept the company a secret?" "No. I knew you had your reasons. But I'm glad you finally let others see who you really are." That one sentence was simple, but it landed like a mountain. Because for so many years, I felt like I had to constantly defend my choice to live differently. Not just to the world but to my own family. A few days later, I received an email from Uncle Roger's attorney. No long subject line, just a single sentence. Chairman Roger Hale would like to meet with Ms. Nora to discuss a potential strategic partnership. I sat still for a few seconds. The man who once ignored my existence now wanted to talk strategy. I thought about it carefully. Then I agreed, not for status, but because I wanted to prove something. I could sit at a table they never thought had a seat for me. The meeting took place at a private Italian restaurant in the Pearl District. Uncle Roger arrived first, without an assistant or aide. He shook my hand, his gaze still measuring, but not as cold as before. "You've done very well," he began. I nodded slightly. "I just did what I believed needed to be done." He leaned back, sipped his espresso, then continued. "I've got a few stalled projects that don't fit our current expansion model. But with your approach, sustainable and socially driven, there might be an opportunity for mutual benefit." I didn't answer right away. I wanted to hear him out. And I wanted to see if he truly understood my vision, or was simply trying to buy in now that I was no longer in the shadows. The conversation lasted nearly 2 hours. As we parted, he said, "If you ever want a place in the family system, I'll be ready to make room." I paused, looked him in the eye, and answered calmly, "I don't need to join the system. I'm building my own." On the way home, I received another email, this time from a community housing organization I had applied to for funding 3 years ago and been rejected. Now they were inviting me to serve as a strategic advisor. The doors were opening, not because I changed who I was, but because I'd stayed the course long enough in the dark for the light to finally find me. What surprised me most was a short message from Preston, a week after the dinner, and his complete silence. "I think I misjudged you. If you're open to it, I'd like to learn more about your approach. Maybe I need to start over." I didn't rush to reply. I didn't need an apology. But I did appreciate genuine change, if that's what it was. I used to think silence was a form of endurance. But in the end I realized, sometimes silence is the only way to truly hear yourself in a world full of noise. My family didn't change overnight. They still live the way they choose, and I respect that. But the difference now is that, for the first time, they've begun to see me as an equal. Not as the minimalist, or the one who doesn't get money, but as someone with vision, with a path, and with visible results. I didn't become someone else. I simply stepped into the light at the right time. And when I did, I brought with me all the values that had once been overlooked: resilience, compassion, and commitment to community. True wealth, I believe, isn't in your bank balance or the floor number of your apartment. It lies in how you use your influence. Whether you choose to build or to tear down. Whether you lift others up or stand on top of them to look taller. I was once laughed at for living simply. But now, the very things they mocked are what make me stand out. And maybe even stronger than those who misjudged me. If you've ever been judged for moving slowly, for living differently, for not following the crowd, I just want you to remember this. Sometimes the ones seen as lost are actually on the right path. They just don't need to shout to prove it. They let the results speak for themselves. My story isn't just about turning the tables. It's a reminder that success doesn't need to be loud. In a world that glorifies flash and speed, sometimes real power lies in patience, persistence, and staying true to your path. I don't need to prove I'm better than anyone, only that I'm living in alignment with my values. And today, looking back, I know I wasn't slow. I was steady. And that's what makes me irreplaceable. What do you think of the way I chose to face my family? Was silence a wise strategy? Share your thoughts below. And don't forget to follow the channel so you don't miss the next surprising family story.